Welcome back to another Coach 101 on the Boomer Bust channel. I'm your host, Terry, and today talking about game planning. So this might be a long one, but before we get into it, I just want to say, and I'll mention this a couple more times, my goal, my aim is not to uh, make it seem like I know more than people. I don't have any information that other people don't have or that's not free. It's just sharing my experience, as I mentioned before. Even with that being said, though, there are some principles that I go by on this channel. Number one, I have a lot of trust in the academic process, meaning that if you're going to have a statement, back it up with some evidence, evidence that's valid, that's reliable, and not just making wild statements, and also considering the context. So not just one statement, but understanding how that applies to multiple contexts as well. So all that, when we're talking about football or anything else, I honor that. And so if I'm not doing that, if I'm making definitive statements as it's fact, but I'm not backing it up with the academic process, then you call me out, and I call out people that do that as well. That's not going to change. Number two, I believe in the football principles of the game. I mean, these aren't principles that I made up. These are principles that were A, taught to me, and I learned them. B, I've seen play out over the course of years. And C, these are principles that coaches on every level I've met and been with agree by. So as fans, you might think you got answers. If you're not in the coaching circle, not in the football scouting, any of that circle, you might think you have answers or you see it one way. Trust me, coaches do not see eye to eye with the fans. And so if you're saying things about football that just don't line up to regular football principles, I'm going to call it out. It's just what it is. It's not me to say I'm better. I'm just providing information. If you know the information, cool. If you have an alternative take, then we can have that discussion. And if you don't know the information, it's just here for you to learn. That's it. So with all that being said, let's talk about game planning. Game planning is a lot, and I'm excited. I was thinking about this topic, and I started kind of breaking down, well, what do I think about game planning? And I'm like, man, there's a lot to it. So before I get started, I also want to say that I'm not saying I'm the expert. Once again, this is my experience, and understand it's like a lot of things. It's going to be very different depending on each situation, each coach, each place. And definitely when you're talking about the levels that you go up from high school or even Pee Wee up to, NFL. So this is my interpretation of the basics. I'm not going to get into everything. And if other coaches are listening, to feel free to put in how they do things. So as far as game planning, so how does that look? So it all starts kind of with the scouting report. We all hear that term. We know what that is, but what does that mean? And that looks different on each level. I would say mostly the high school level, but there's some lower college, non-major colleges that's kind of similar. So when you talk about the high school level, you're talking about mostly coaches that have to break down the film, and it always goes back to the film. And there, of course, higher prestige and higher prestige states, schools, champions that have more staff or volunteers to do this. But for the most part, by and large, I think you'll find the coaching staff is responsible for breaking down the tape. And so what you do is you get the tape, and you have somebody, whether it's the coach or whoever. In the NFL, more or 1,000 times is not going to be the coach. In higher colleges, it's not going to be the coach. It's going to be some type of grad assistant or some type of something, quality control coach, whatever. And so they break down the tape, as in they're adding in down in distance. They're adding in what type of play is it, run pass, does it go to the left, does it go to the right, is it complete, incomplete, fumble, whatever. They're adding the formations. They're adding the type of play, the front, a blitz, all the information they can. And so that software that most people use, a software, will then break that down into percentages. And so again, talking about more towards the NFL, if you're a person that's in charge of that, you're going to know what your coaching staff likes to get. And so that can be different from team to team. I would say there's definitely some things that are just universal, but you're going to know the important metrics and stats that your coaches want. And it's kind of like taking a coffee order. Every coach might have something different, and you're just going to fill that whole order. It's not like, oh, I'm going to get this because the head coach asked, but I'm not going to get this. No, you're going to get what everybody wants, and it usually just ends up being a large amount of stats, but different stats mean different things to different coaches. But essentially, it could be very detailed. You could go from left, right. Whether as a defense, I want to know, does this offense go to the left more than they go to the right as a team? Or I could break it down. Do they go to the left more as when they run the ball versus when they pass the ball? Or I could break it down by down and distance. Are they going to the right more so on first down, but to the left more so on third down? Whether it's a pass or run, then you could go to pass or run. And so there's a lot of different ways you could break it down. It could be that detailed. It could be bigger trends, whatever, but you're trying to get a tendency of what the team does. And so however you get that, for us, as an example, like I said, we would enter that as a coaching staff on one of my staffs that I've been on, but each staff is different. We would enter it as soon as we got it. Like I said, the night of, after a game, we'll get the film. Hey, film is up. Let's start breaking it down, and we'll stay up all, types of hours a night breaking it down. And in the NFL, of course, you have people that can break that down for you, and they'll get that to you the day after a game, maybe the same night, because I'm assuming that the NFL, they can get that film quicker. And so then, coaches are always thinking about it. And so once you get those tendencies and, the top formations, the top runs, those are some popular ones, the top passes or, top coverages, how many times they blitz, whatever it is. Once you get those things, then the next time you meet up as a staff, we would then try to, we would just get on the board and draw it out. So it could be on the board or whatever, but we would say, okay, here's their top formations or whatever. Let's look at how our base defense would line up to that formation. And then once we put our base out there, because your base has rules, so you could line up to any formation, we say, okay, this is what we would do in our base formation. Once we got all that, then we could even look at the top runs and say, okay, here's the top runs. Now for us, again, it's going to be different because one of my first staff, we were in a conference that was very run heavy. And so almost every team was better at run than they were at pass. So we really focused in on the run. Some coordinators, just as a rule, focus more on the run. Some, switch it up depending on opponent, whatever. And so those very different factors. But for us, we would look at the top runs and we would say, okay, out of our base alignment against this formation and against this run, do we like what we got? And then that would be a time for the rest of the defensive staff or whoever to put out suggestions to say, well, what if we do this or that? And then we decide as a staff or, however you decide that this is what we're going to go with. Okay, instead of base aligning, we're going to call the strength to the running back. Calling back to a previous episode, inside zone. Let's say this team loves to run inside zone out of shotgun. That's their number one run play. Well, we know that inside zone primary target is the open B gap. Well, so then from there we can say, all right, let's call the strength away from the back. So that way we always keep our B gap defender away from the backs in case they want to run inside zone. And then so it's a lot of different ways you could do it. You could decide to go to a nickel. You could even put it in a different formation. You could say, hey, they run this play, a 5-2 would really work good against it. Let's put a 5-2 in this week, whatever you decide. So you decide how you want to line up to each of the formations and any special things that you want to do for a certain look for a run or the pass. Now, of course, there's a lot of different things that can be thrown in there. Whether it's a trick play you saw one time and you want to discuss how you might want to defend that, or if there's a play that they don't run often, but you saw it and you're like, okay, I want to get prepared for that, and that's going to vary by coach. Again, it's going to be different because as you can imagine, some coaches could sit up all night and really want to over prepare and be like, I want to think of every possible thing they can do, and we want to be ready for it. And some coaches is like, if we spend a little bit of time on everything, we're not going to be ready for anything. And so it's different philosophies on how you want to approach it. For us, and for what I find effective, we do focus on the top things. Now, that does come into question with tape. And so, again, college, college and NFL, I doubt you have this issue because a lot of them, I believe they all have access to tape and they govern the rules of it. In high school, it's all about the state laws. And so for Illinois, Indiana, where I've been, you got to get at least 2 tapes. There's an exchange process. Now, it's not, you're only required or obligated to give like 2 tapes. And usually it's the 2 most recent, but it's not very heavily, patrolled or anything. It's more of an honor system. And that's a head coach's job. So for us in high school, a head coach would say, they'd contact the other head coach, be like, hey, we want to get this tape, or I got this tape. So you can request, you can say, well, I want your week 2 tape and your week 5 tape. Is that cool? And they could agree to it or not. Or if you have a situation where they say, oh, we didn't tape that last game or the tape got damaged, then you can say, okay, we'll only give you 1 tape since you're giving me 1 tape. It just depends on the relationship between the coaches. So you could say, oh, I'll give you both tapes even though you're giving me 1 tape because you know that coach, whatever. It's all depending on how the 2 coaches' relationship plays out. And then on top of that, you got other coaches on the staff. So what will happen, especially as you get later into the season, you might know a coach or somebody on the football team that played your opponent. And you say, hey, you got that tape against North Central? And they'll be like, yeah, I'll give it to you, and so you get the tape that way. Or maybe they're like, hey, you're playing Southwest in 2 weeks. When you get that tape, give me it because we played them as well, and I'll give you this tape. So it's all about relationships in that sense. And so a lot of times with me personally, our staffs would just use our various connections to get all the tapes or as many as we can. So, but sometimes you're really going off 2 tapes. But again, in the NFL and the college ranks, I don't think that's an issue. And so, again, very philosophically different. Some coaches, I would say most coaches, stick to the tendencies, especially as you go further into the season. So you hear a lot of fans saying, oh, man, why don't we just switch it up? Why don't we just switch it up? Why don't you just do something contrary to popular belief? You don't do that in football. You just don't. You don't just have a completely new playbook week to week. And so there might be stuff you practice and pull out in certain weeks, or there might be some you practice a few plays that week that you want to add, but you don't just completely do a new scheme, out of nowhere. That's not how football works. You practice how you play, and you usually run what you practice. And so if you're playing a team in week 14 and you got 13 weeks or 12 weeks worth of tape, and so you're able to say by the numbers, and numbers can lie, but in tendency-wise, you can say definitively, not definitively, but strongly, this is what they like to do. I can break it down over X amount of games. Because again, I forgot what NFL software they mostly use. It might have changed. I know with a few NFL coaches I worked with, I've seen the software they use, and I'm sure it's changed since then. But for us, we use Huddle. And huddle is even big in some colleges. And so the way it works, like any software, like I said, you type the stuff in and then it just gives you a percentage breakdown and everything. So if I got 14 weeks worth of games, then I can say, okay, 80% to the right on first down is a strong trend versus if I'm only got one game of film. And so when you hear teams talking about, oh, they got you on film now, that's going to make a difference. That's what they're talking about. When you're talking about a first year coach with a new scheme that, especially offensively, that people haven't seen, is going to take a while because you could practice a whole set of stuff in the off season. One game, show part of it, and they're like, okay, that's what they do. And then you show a whole new part next week, and they're not ready for it. All these different things. And so the further you go into the season, the more reliable that data is. And so that is what most coaches tend to stick to. What do the trends say and the tendencies? So anyway, with all that being said, once you decide as a team or as a staff how you want to line up to certain formations, how you want to play certain runs, maybe whenever you see them pull in 21 personnel, you know they like to do this play, and we're going to slant to the weak side because that blows up that play. Whatever. It could be very specific. And then so you figure out how you want to do it. Now, the first practice usually of that week, you'll have a film session before practice. Now, again, that's going to be different, especially when you're talking about better high schools. Of course, in the NFL, they got practice time. And so it changes. And again, I've mentioned this before, but I've heard a lot of coaches say this, and you agree or disagree, high school is one of the toughest coaching jobs. Because in high school, you got a limited amount of time that you get to be with the players after school. And then depending on facilities, it might be until it's dark or whatever. Some schools are better with technology. Some schools don't have technology, so you can't do film sessions. And then when you go to college, of course, they're not in school all day as much as they are in high school, but they still have class. And so you have practice time around that. And then you go to the NFL, where you got all really the time in the world. We see how many meetings they're in, and they got meetings everywhere. So as you go up in level, the resources and the time you have is a lot more, and that's why it's professional. So anyway, with us, we'll do a film session before the first practice, and that's when we give them the scouting report so they know the percentages, run versus pass, left versus right, top formations, top runs, top passes, top blitzes, top coverages, all those different things. And so they see what we see. But then we show them film so they know what we're talking about. So if I say their number one play is 32 power inverted veer, and as a player you might not know exactly what that is, we show you the film so you could at least have a visual reference point. Or, if we show a formation, double stack, diamond pair, razor right, whatever. And I show you the film to see, okay, when I say that, I know that's the formation he's talking about, or I know that's the run he's talking about. And so with that, the team gets a visual cue to be on the same page. Now you go out to practice to the field, and again, it's different for every team, but for us, we would start off with an alignment period. And so what we would do is bring out the top formations, and the starters, the defense would get lined up to it in base. And by that time, they should know how to line up in base because you got certain calls and everything. So they line it up in our base formation. And then you tweak. So you're going to say, all right, good job. You lined up in base. All right, so this week, we're actually going to call the strength to this way. Or when they line up in this formation, we're going to bring such and such in at the dime, and we're going to switch it this way, or whatever the tweak is, you teach them the tweaks. And then you hopefully have a speed period where then you can have the scout team run out in offense or formations, have the defense line up, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then hopefully you got time to do it with your second string as well. and whoever your key, backups are, and so that they know what they're doing. So we know how we're lining up to these formations. And you could talk a little bit about, remember if they do this run, that you got to do this, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, you want to make sure we get lined up correctly. And so you go over a couple things too. What if we're in nickel and they come out in this? Then this is how it should be lined up, whatever. So then from there, you'll do practice as usual. Usually it's some type of special teams and then individuals or individuals first, whatever. And individual positions, you're going over skills. But a lot of times, if you got a certain tweak that week, you use individual period to go over it. So if I'm going against a team that loves to run like trap plays or whatever, and maybe we usually teach our D-line that we spill that play if we get trapped or we get a pull. Maybe this time we want to wrong arm it. And so we have to go to individuals as defensive line. I'll be talking to my D-line about wrong arming, and we'll be working through what that looks like and getting ourselves used to that. It might be the linebackers. You might have a different read this time or a different way you want them to take on the coverage. And it might be secondary. You might say, all right, I might want you to this team really struggles with press, we saw. We want to do some press. So you might work on your shadow technique. You might work on jamming. Maybe you got Travis Kelce in the slot or DeAndre Hopkins that likes to line up in the slot, and you want to work on rerouting. And so you get your linebackers to work on their drops into coverage, but also rerouting the slot. Whatever that is for that week, you want to work on it in individuals. Then you go to more of a team setting, whether it's the front. So some teams that blitz a lot have a blitz period where they go over their blitz. Some people just do a front where you got the D-line and the linebackers and you're working on the run game. And either way, you could install. So let's say we decided our game plan is we're going to add this blitz in, this specific blitz against this formation every time because we think it works, or we're going to have this blitz on this down and we want to add that blitz, or we want to add this coverage, whatever. So if it's just the front, the secondary can go work on end zone, one-on-one skills, whatever. Or if you got the whole defense and the team period, whatever it is. And so you could do install, some type of install to add whatever is new for that week that you want to do. And then there's a team period where you go against the scout team. And so with the scout team, usually the opposite coach gets a script together. So the defensive coach might put or one of the defensive coaches might put a script together for the offensive side so they can run the plays and vice versa. And then so as a coach, you know exactly what plays is about to come up. And so you can watch your unit and make sure that everybody's doing their job right. Like some people say I'm nitpicky. Maybe coaching does that too. You have no idea. And it's easy to get into that when you know exactly what it should look like. And that's what I'm saying. So if you say we made a play on defense in practice against the scout team, but my defensive line that got trapped, he didn't take the block on with his right arm, but the linebacker made the play. A lot of fans, a lot of players be like, Coach, we made the play. It don't matter. Yeah, you made the play. But if you didn't make the play, if we didn't make the play, or if that linebacker didn't overcompensate for you, then this running back or whoever would have had this huge gain because you didn't do your job. Like just because he did his job and overcompensated for you doesn't make it any less offensive or less penalty that you didn't do your job. You need to have, because it's not about what happens, it's about how it happens. And so as a coach, again, you plan and you scheme and you draw it up and you figure out how it's supposed to look. And so when you run scout team, you know exactly how it's supposed to look. And so people talk about me. You should see some of these coaches. Trust me, these coaches get after these players in practice. because you know exactly how it's supposed to look. And so when it doesn't look that way, there can be problems, whether we made the play or not. And so each individual, position coach is looking at their position, but as a D coordinator or a head coach or whatever, you know what it's supposed to look like, and you want to make sure the defense is in position. And so same thing with offense on the reverse side as well. And so, again, that's kind of how practice rolls. And then from there, the rest of the week is a similar type of practice. And so usually what will happen is the second practice is the most physical, because the first one after the game is shorter because you have the film session before you get on the field, so you got less field time. Of course, like I said, in the NFL, different because you got indoor fields, you got a lot of meetings, all that good stuff. But usually, you want guys to recoup a little, and so that practice is usually a little shorter, or at least shorter on the field. And then the second one's usually the most physical because, again, you're further away from the game, but as you get closer to the game, it becomes less physical and all that, and so you get less time. But again, those practices are still kind of similar in that way. So you might have less time to go over all these things, but you're still going over those same things. So in the game planning process, it all starts with the film. And again, really as coaches, scheming up what you want to do for it. Now, in my experience, and again, I've been in the NFL, but football logic tends to hold up. Offenses can game plan a little less than what their defensive counterparts do, because offenses typically, you have certain plays in the playbook already. So let's say we're looking at a team and they run 90% cover 3. A good coach in the NFL, I guess you should be, already has cover 3 beaters. Like, I already know which plays I like against cover 3, or I know what type of runs I like against this type of formation. And so what usually happens is either A, you'll start bringing out more of those specific plays that week to attack the defense, or B, you already have plays that are designed well where they can attack multiple levels. And so I've talked about Nagy flooding areas with the Bears, and I've talked about that type of stuff. And well-designed offensive plays have something that's vertical. It has something that's intermediate. It has something in the flat. It has something, in different places, because that way, if you run up against a different coverage, you always have an option. And that's why I usually don't like all routes. Like, everybody run a curl. Everybody run slants. Everybody run verticals. I usually don't like that stuff, because then against the wrong coverage, you're done. And so I like well-designed, balanced route combos that attack different areas. And so anyway, with offenses, it's usually a little easier to adjust, because instead of me saying, hey, we're going to add this play in instead of the stick route, I can say, well, against this coverage, against this team, this is going to be your better route to throw to in the stick combo. Or if they show blitz like this, then you want to go to this route in the stick combo. So usually the combos are still there. It's just changing kind of who you go to and which situation. And so in that sense, offenses don't usually change a whole bunch. Whereas defense, there's a lot of different ways that you can game plan and change, as mentioned. So that's kind of how that goes. And it's similar offense and defense. But again, every coaching staff is different. But one thing I hope is that if you did listen to all this, put Coach Dick LeBeau, because he's the one in the pictures in your comments. But if you listen to all this, hopefully what you take away is there's a lot of work that goes into coaching. Whether you just think it's a lot of work but don't know what it is, or you never believed it's a lot of work, or whether you think a head coach is just, la-di-da-di, there's a lot of decisions. Listening to the conversation I just had, there's a million different ways you can zig when I zag. And the way I've done it in my experience is just one way. There's a lot of different decisions you have to make as a coach, especially when it comes to game planning. And a lot of different philosophies come into play and all those different things. And so hopefully at the end of the day, like I said, when you're going through practice, you get players comfortable and confident. And that goes back to the other episode. Excuse me. That goes back to the other episode with confidence, tying that in as well. And when you're talking about a well-balanced game plan where players really feel you know exactly, or they know exactly what you want them to do, and they feel they know exactly what they're seeing when they come line up in the game because they've been prepared for it. Now, you'll get some teams that will do something different, and that's what's called tendency breakers. But for the most part, like I said, coaches trust in the numbers when it comes to tendencies, because you might hit a play, but you're never going to be great at what you don't practice. And not just in practice, but what you actually run in the game. It might be different motions and window dressing, which is what a lot of offense is right now. But at the end of the day, you're running the same play. And so most coaches will focus in on what are your tendencies in those type of ways. And so that's why it's important not to be predictable as an offensive play caller or defensive play caller. But at the same time, at the end of the day, most coaches know you're going to run what your identity is. And so that's why it's important to have an identity. And so, yeah. So anyway, go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about all that. Any questions you still got, share it around, get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe. And remember, thank you for listening.